Most people think the story ends when the anxious person finally walks away. They think that once the one who cared more leaves, once the one who asked for clarity gets tired, once the one who kept trying decides she cannot keep living in the ache of uncertainty, the avoidant breathes out, feels relief, and moves on. But that is not usually where the story ends. For him, that is often where it starts. And if you're sitting there tonight, replaying the exact phrase he used, trying to decide whether he meant what he said or whether you misunderstood, trying to work out whether "I need space" was true or whether it was just a softer way of saying, "I don't want this" enough, then I want you to know that your confusion is not foolish. It is the natural result of being close to someone whose mixed signals kept changing the script while asking you to behave as if the choreography made sense. You are not dramatic because it hurt. You are not weak because it lingers. You are trying to recover from a dynamic where your nervous system was doing overtime in a room where love, attention, and safety were never arriving in the same moment. Here's the truth. Anxious attachment does not mean you love too much. Avoidant attachment does not mean he feels nothing. Those are the easy caricatures people reach for because they save everyone the discomfort of nuance. The anxious person often becomes hyper-attuned to changes in tone, distance, timing, warmth, availability. She notices the delayed reply, the half-commitment, the way affection is present on Tuesday and absent on Thursday. She notices when the standard shifts without warning. And because she notices, she tries to repair. She asks, she reaches, she explains, she overfunctions. Not because she is irrational, but because uncertainty becomes unbearable when your heart is invested and your footing is not secure. Meanwhile, the avoidant person often experiences closeness as pressure long before he can name it. He likes connection until connection starts making demands on his consistency, his vulnerability, his accountability, his self-knowledge. Then the instinct is not to lean in and understand. The instinct is to create distance and call that distance clarity. That is where so many women lose themselves. Because you start responding to his limitations as if they were puzzles you are meant to solve. Picture this. It is 11 at night. Your phone is face down on the nightstand because you promised yourself you were not going to look again, and yet every few minutes your body leans toward it as if it has a pulse of its own. You are replaying the last conversation, the exact sentence, the half apology, the line about not being ready, the line about needing to focus on himself, the line about not wanting to hurt you, even as the hurting had already started. And somewhere beneath all of that is the real pain, which is not just that he pulled away. It is that you kept offering sincerity to someone who wanted the warmth of being cared for without the responsibility of caring with the same depth in return. That is why this cuts so deep. Not because you lost certainty, because you never had it, and you kept being asked to survive on the bare minimum while calling it potential. Let me be clear about one thing. When the anxious walk away, they are rarely walking away because they stopped loving. They are walking away because loving inside that pattern became incompatible with dignity. They are walking away because the orbit became too painful, too circular, too depleting. They are walking away because every time they tried to get closer, the relationship moved to the wings, just out of reach, just far enough away that they could still see it, but never quite stand in it. And by the time she leaves, she is not only grieving him, she is grieving the version of herself who kept waiting for emotional consistency to arrive. If she could just explain herself one more time, be softer one more time, be less demanding one more time, ask for less, need less, tolerate more, understand more, excuse more. That is why her leaving is never casual. It is a last resort. It is the body saying, I cannot live in this stress pattern any longer and still call this love. Here's what most people miss. The avoidant often mistakes the anxious person's persistence for permanence. He starts to believe she will always be there. Why does he believe that? Because every previous rupture taught him that distance would be followed by her attempt to restore contact. Every withdrawal taught him that silence would be broken by her need to make sense of what happened. Every soft dismissal taught him that if he stayed vague enough, gentle enough, unresolved enough, he could keep her in the orbit without having to step fully into commitment or fully out of the picture. And here's the thing, the system starts to feel stable to him precisely because it is destabilizing to her. He gets movement without accountability. He gets comfort without choice. He gets to feel wanted without having to risk the full exposure of mutual love. That is why the real shock does not come when he leaves. The shock comes when she stops returning to the choreography. He didn't expect you to leave quietly. He expected you to chase instead. He expected one more message designed to clear the misunderstanding. One more attempt to show him that what you had was special. One more emotional rescue mission where you helped him process the consequences of his own withdrawal. And when that does not happen, something changes in the dynamic. The power shift begins not because you are playing a game, but because the familiar feedback loop breaks. He no longer has proof that your energy is available on demand. He no longer gets to regulate his discomfort by reaching for your tenderness only when it suits him. He no longer gets the easy story in which he is the one who sets the distance and you are the one who waits in the wings for further instruction. The narrative falters. And when a narrative falters, a person has to meet reality. I want to pause on that for a second, because a lot of people hear this and immediately reduce it to strategy. They think, so the answer is silence. The answer is mystery. The answer is to become hard to read, hard to reach, emotionally unavailable in return. No, that is not the answer. Silence is powerful, but not when it is theater. Mystery is magnetic, but not when it is manufactured to manipulate. Self-respect is not a tactic. Dignity is not a trick to get the upper hand. The reason your absence becomes unsettling to him is not because silence has magical properties. It is because your silence removes the cushion between him and the consequences of his own choices. He finally has to sit in the room he created. He finally has to hear the echo without you rushing in to soften it. And here's something most people don't see coming. The avoidance emotional nightmare does not usually begin as missing you in some cinematic, romantic sense. It begins as disruption, a break in pattern, an uncomfortable absence of what had become familiar. He reaches instinctively toward the place where your reassurance used to live, and it is not there. He looks for the emotional continuity he took for granted, and the space is blank. Does he say to himself, I have made a terrible mistake. I have lost the love of my life? Not at first. What does he say? Usually something much smaller and much more revealing. He wonders why you're not there. He wonders why the usual script has changed. He wonders why the person he believed would remain available has become unavailable to the pattern. And here's the thing. The wondering is what undoes him. Because wondering requires him to confront the fact that you were not furniture in his life. You were a human being making choices. Think about it like this. Chasing an avoidant is a little like trying to keep a volleyball underwater. The more force you use, the more pressure builds, and the more violently it wants to shoot away from you. For a while, you might manage it. For a while, your effort can create the illusion of control. But the whole time you are exhausting your self-service of something that is structurally designed to resist sustained closeness. And the moment you stop forcing, the truth reveals itself. The ball doesn't become cruel. It just follows its nature. That can be devastating to realize because you wanted the situation to respond to love. But one of the hardest adult lessons in relationships is that love does not correct for limitations someone has not faced within themselves. Affection does not erase emotional immaturity. Patience does not create readiness. Understanding does not produce reciprocity where there is no willingness to practice it. Now, let me explain something slowly. When an anxious person finally walks away in a real way, not as protest, not as performance, but as a boundary rooted in self-worth, the avoidant loses more than a person. He loses a psychological arrangement. He loses access to the familiar rhythm in which he could come close when lonely and withdraw when vulnerable, reach out when it was convenient, and disappear when intimacy began making claims on him. That arrangement gave him the illusion that he was free from pressure. But what it actually gave him was a way to postpone self-confrontation. The anxious person's presence, however painful it may have been for her, allowed him to keep outrunning himself. Because as long as she was still there, he never had to ask the harder question. Not whether she wanted him. He already knew that. He had the spotlight. The harder question was whether he was capable of meeting the standard required by the kind of love he enjoyed receiving. He didn't expect you to become still. He expected you to explain instead. He expected paragraphs. He expected emotional translation. He expected you to tell him that you understood, that you weren't angry, that you just wanted honesty, that you could be patient, that you could give him time, that all you needed was a little reassurance. He expected a bridge, and when that bridge does not appear, the river becomes visible. That is when his nervous system starts to register the distance as something real, not because you announced a punishment, because you stopped volunteering to span the gap alone. Here's the thing. Avoidant people often tell themselves a very flattering story about why they withdraw. They call it needing space, needing room, not being ready, being overwhelmed, wanting things to be easy. Sometimes those things are true in part, but there is another layer they don't enjoy naming. Closeness exposes them. A woman who genuinely cares, who notices, who asks direct questions, who has warmth and emotional availability and standards, begins to reveal the difference between who he says he is and what he is actually capable of sustaining. That exposure can feel deeply uncomfortable, not because she is too much, because she is clear enough that his inconsistencies are harder to hide inside the relationship. So he creates distance and then attributes the discomfort to the relationship itself. This is one reason anxious women spend far too long blaming themselves. They are reacting to someone else's inability to tolerate the mirror, and here's where the nightmare really begins. At first, it is a void, just a quiet space where your checking in used to be, where your emotional labor used to be, where your willingness to keep the thread alive used to be. He tells himself the quiet is fine, maybe even a relief. He has room again, air again, no pressure, no conversations he doesn't want to have, no expectation hanging over him. But the void does not stay a void. That is the part he doesn't see coming. It becomes a vacuum, because once the immediate relief passes, the absence starts drawing his attention back to itself. He notices the missing warmth. He notices the lack of your responsiveness. He notices that the room is not peaceful in the way he expected. It is empty in a way that asks questions, and a vacuum does that. It doesn't shout. It pulls. It draws every unexamined thought toward the center. He starts to wonder whether you are angry. He starts to wonder whether you are done. He starts to wonder whether there is someone else. Is that because he suddenly became secure and emotionally articulate overnight? No. It is because the vacuum has started to create an echo. And the echo is made of all the things he pushed away while you were still available. The times you asked for clarity. The moments he felt your hurt and sidestepped it. The conversations he postponed. The half promises. The soft exits. The ways he let you remain in an orbit that protected his comfort but eroded your self-respect. And now, without your immediate presence to soothe the tension, those moments start to reverberate. The echo grows. It comes back at him in the quieter parts of the day, in the drive home, in the hour before sleep, in those strange seconds after he reaches for his phone and realizes there is no new message from the person who used to care enough to send one. I want you to notice something. This is why silence can feel louder than protest. If you had screamed, he could have focused on your reaction. If you had begged, he could have focused on your need. If you had tried one more time to persuade him, he could have focused on your pressure. But when you become calm and unavailable to the pattern, his attention has nowhere obvious to go but inward. Silence becomes a mirror held up to him, and that mirror is deeply unsettling to someone who has spent years managing discomfort by moving away from it. It is not your job to wield that mirror. It is simply what happens when you stop standing between him and himself. He didn't expect you to choose dignity. He expected you to preserve the connection instead. He expected that your fear of losing him would be stronger than your commitment to yourself. He expected that your longing would outrank your boundary. He expected that being close enough to possibly get him would feel preferable to being fully without him. And if that had remained true, the dynamic would have continued. But something in you finally said no. Maybe not loudly, maybe not with a dramatic speech. Maybe all you did was stop reaching, stop volunteering, stop accepting crumbs dressed up as intimacy. Yet that small change can alter everything because self-respect has a different kind of magnetism, not the magnetism of seduction, the magnetism of coherence, of a woman whose actions finally match what her pain has been trying to teach her. This is the part nobody's going to like hearing. Some avoidant men do not come back with wisdom. Some do not have a reckoning that turns them into the partner you needed. Some simply feel the loss, feel the discomfort, feel the disruption, and then go looking for another arrangement that asks less of them. That is real. And I need you to hear that because this cannot become a fantasy about his comeback. The point of understanding this pattern is not to build false hope around a reunion. The point is to stop misreading your own experience. When the anxious walk away, something significant does begin for the avoidant. But what begins is not guaranteed growth. It is confrontation with absence. What he does with that confrontation depends on his character, his self-awareness, and his willingness to outgrow the emotional immaturity that made the relationship unlivable in the first place. And here's the truth inside that. His reckoning is not your assignment. Your healing cannot be held hostage by whether he learns. Because if you are not careful, even this knowledge becomes another orbit. You start thinking, maybe my silence is working. Maybe now he gets it. Maybe now he misses me. Maybe now he feels the void. Maybe now the power shift is happening. And suddenly your no contact becomes another form of contact because mentally you are still arranging your life around his internal weather. That is not reclaiming your life. That is still living inside his narrative. Real reclaiming begins when you let your silence belong to you, not as a message to him, but as a return to yourself. Let me be clear about something. The anxious person who walks away does not just deprive him of access. She deprives the old version of herself of further humiliation. That matters. Because there is a version of you he knew. The version who over-explained. The version who waited by the phone. The version who accepted emotional ambiguity because she was trying to be understanding. The version who kept making permission slips for his limitations. The version who thought compassion meant tolerating the intolerable. That version of you may have loved deeply, but she was also bleeding self-worth in ways she could no longer afford. When you leave, she begins to disappear. And the woman who emerges is not the one he rejected. She no longer exists. He starts to think about you. Why now? Because absence has weight. At first it was just space, then it became the echo. Then the echo became a kind of weight he carries without knowing where to put it. He remembers your warmth. He remembers the steadiness you offered. He remembers the emotional intelligence he benefited from without fully appreciating. He remembers that you saw him in ways that were kind and clear at once. And because your presence is no longer available to stabilize him, those memories stop feeling optional. They begin to feel instructive. Does that mean he is finally seeing your value? Sometimes. But more importantly, it means he is seeing the cost of having treated your value as if it were endlessly accessible. Think about it like this. Dignity is something you carry. When you tolerate less than you deserve, it grows heavy in your hands. Every compromise against your own truth adds weight. Every time you agree to the bare minimum and call it patience, every time you accept orbiting in place of real choice, every time you let your standard be rewritten because you are afraid to lose him, the thing gets heavier. You feel it in your chest, in your body, in the little private moments where you know you are betraying yourself to keep a man near. Then one day you put it down. You stop carrying what was never yours to carry alone. And the strange thing is that when you do, you become lighter and he becomes heavier. Not because you handed him pain, because you finally stopped holding all of it for both of you. He didn't expect you to remove your energy. He expected you to keep the connection warm instead. He expected you to leave the door cracked. He expected that even if the relationship was undefined, your availability would remain defined. He expected emotional aftercare without emotional commitment. And once that is gone, he is face to face with the truth that he was not just receiving love. He was receiving infrastructure. He was receiving the emotional architecture that let him drift in and out without collapsing the whole thing. Your attentiveness was holding up more of the relationship than either of you wanted to admit. I'm going to say something, and some of you will disagree. The avoidance nightmare is not that the anxious woman becomes cold. It is that she becomes full. That may sound strange, but stay with me. If she becomes cold, he can keep her in his old narrative. He can say she was dramatic, bitter, punishing, trying to get the upper hand. He can reduce her departure to a reaction. But if she becomes full, if she becomes centered, if she becomes oriented around her own life again, if she is no longer orbiting his confusion, then he loses a story that protected him. He can no longer say that she was simply too much, because now she is not chasing, not pleading, not punishing. She has just gone from the pattern. She has exited the stage. And the fact that she could do that forces a much more uncomfortable possibility into view. Perhaps she was never too much. Perhaps he was simply unwilling. Now, let me walk through this with you one piece at a time. Anxious attachment says, if I can just restore connection, I can restore safety. That is why silence feels so brutal at first. Your body reads no contact as danger. Your mind goes into inquiry. Did I overreact? Was I too rigid? Should I send one calm message? Would a kinder tone make a difference? What if he was just scared? These thoughts are not proof that you should go back. They are symptoms of withdrawal from a relational pattern that trained you to seek relief in the very place the pain was coming from. This is why the early days can feel almost unbearable. You are not only missing him, you are breaking a conditioning cycle. You are teaching your nervous system that uncertainty does not have to be solved through self-abandonment. And here's something else most people miss. Your silence is not just affecting him, it is educating you. Every day you do not send the message you want to send. You learn that an urge is not a command. Every evening you survive without the reassurance you used to chase. You learn that pain can move through you without needing to be immediately anesthetized by contact. Every time you choose a boundary over the fantasy of one more conversation, you are rebuilding trust with yourself. That is not glamorous work. It is repetitive, quiet, sometimes ugly. Sometimes you still check your phone. Sometimes you still rehearse what you would say if he came back. Sometimes you still miss him in ways that make no sense to your intelligent mind. But healing is not the absence of longing. It is the refusal to let longing decide your standard. Here's what most people miss. There is a difference between chemistry and safety, between being activated and being cherished, between feeling wanted in flashes and feeling chosen over time. Anxious attachment often confuses intensity with meaning because the body feels so much. Avoidant attachment often confuses distance with truth because space feels easier than intimacy. Put those two people together, and the dynamic can become electric in all the wrong ways. One person reaches harder when afraid. The other person steps back when afraid. The reaching triggers the withdrawal. The withdrawal triggers the reaching. Then both people misread the pattern. She says, if only he knew how much I care. He says, if only she would stop pressuring me. Meanwhile, the relationship becomes an engine of mutual dysregulation dressed up as love. That is why understanding attachment styles matters. Not so you can label him and stay. So you can see the pattern clearly enough to stop sacrificing your peace to it. And here's the thesis buried beneath all of this. Your silence after his distance is not weakness. It is the boundary that finally tells the truth. It tells the truth to him because he can no longer rely on your availability to soften his ambivalence. It tells the truth to you because you can no longer pretend that half love is enough. And it tells the truth to the relationship itself because any connection that only functions when one person overfunctions is not stable love. It is maintenance. It is management. It is a choreography built on one person carrying the emotional rhythm for two. I need you to hear me on this. Self-respect often feels nothing like empowerment in the beginning. It feels like loss, like withdrawal, like emptiness, like waking up and having to resist the old compulsion to reach for the person who made your heart race and your stomach drop in equal measure. People talk about boundaries as if they arrive with confidence. Often they arrive shaking. Often they arrive through tears. Often they arrive because pain has finally become more honest than hope. But a trembling boundary is still a boundary. A woman crying in her kitchen who does not send the text is still practicing dignity. A woman who misses him and leaves anyway is still reclaiming her life. Courage is not emotional neatness. It is self-respect in motion. He didn't expect you to become unavailable to the pattern. He expected you to remain emotionally on call instead. He expected your care to survive his inconsistency better than your own self-worth survived it. He expected that because many women are trained to confuse loyalty with limitless tolerance, but loyalty without standards becomes self-erasure. And the moment you stop erasing yourself to maintain access to him, he is confronted by something new, not your anger, not your sadness, your standard. The standard says, you do not get the warmth of me without the responsibility of meeting me. You do not get to keep me as a second choice while you decide whether closeness is convenient. You do not get to remain in my orbit after the relationship has made a home out of my anxiety. I'm going to say something else, and I want you to sit with it. Some of what you miss is not him. Some of what you miss is the hope version of him. The version who would finally understand. The version who would one day call and speak with clarity. The version who would say, I see what I did. I see what you meant to me. I know I hid from this, but I do not want to hide anymore. That imagined reunion can be powerful. It can become its own source of magnetism. But if you are not careful, you end up grieving not just what happened, but what never actually happened and still might not. Part of growing beyond this dynamic is learning to love the truth more than the fantasy. And the truth is not cruel. It is clarifying. This is the part nobody's going to like hearing. If he comes back without real work, without self-awareness, without the ability to tolerate honest conversation, without evidence that he can stay emotionally present when it matters, then his return changes nothing. The comeback is not the point. The pattern is the point. A reunion without transformation is just the same breakup on a different calendar. The same silence, the same confusion, the same power shift that always ends with you losing pieces of yourself while trying to prove your value to someone who has already had ample evidence of it. And here's something most people don't see coming. The more you stop centering him, the clearer your own emotional life becomes. You begin to notice how tired you were, how much mental real estate he occupied, how many friendships you half showed up for because your inner world was dominated by the latest text, delay, cancellation, uncertainty, mixed signal, emotional weather report. You begin to feel the return of your own rhythm. You sleep a little better, then badly again, then better. You laugh once without immediately thinking of him. You go a full afternoon without checking whether he has watched your story or changed his profile picture or sent the message you are both dreading and wanting. These things sound small. They are not. This is your life returning in pieces. This is your nervous system learning a new choreography. One where your peace is not constantly negotiated against somebody else's avoidance. Picture yourself a few weeks from now, not healed in some dramatic, polished way, just a little more with yourself. You wake up and the first thought is not him. You drink water before checking your phone. You answer the message from the friend you have been meaning to call back. You go outside even though part of you wants to hide. You move your body, not to become impressive, but because grief metabolizes differently when the body is invited back into the room. You tidy the small things that fell apart while your heart was preoccupied. You retie the loose ends. You make the appointment, you clear the drawer, you return the book, you change the sheets. These are not trivial acts. They are the architecture of self-return. Practical care is sometimes the most profound form of reclaiming because it says, my life is not suspended pending his clarity. Let me be clear about something. Moving on is not an act of amnesia. You do not need to erase him to heal. You do not need to become cynical. You do not need to pretend it meant nothing. The goal is not numbness. The goal is proportion. He becomes part of your story rather than the stage on which all meaning must now play out. His energy stops dictating your mood. His uncertainty stops becoming your emergency. His narrative stops being the place where you go to determine your worth. That is the real power shift. Not that he feels more. That you organize your life less around whether he does. And if he does come back, if one day the phone lights up and his name appears and the old adrenaline floods in, I want you to remember this. You do not owe instant access to someone just because he has finally felt the void. You do not owe warmth on demand. You do not owe a soft landing to a man who only arrives once your absence becomes uncomfortable. Can people change? Yes. Can avoidant people become more secure, more accountable, more emotionally available? Of course. But change is not declared in one vulnerable message. It is demonstrated over time through consistency, humility, ownership, and the ability to remain present when the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Words are easy in the lonely moment. Pattern change is visible in the sustained one. Here's the thing. If he returns and you choose to speak, go slowly, slowly. Let time reveal what urgency tries to conceal. Ask simple questions and watch for clear answers. Notice whether he can tolerate your honesty without becoming defensive, evasive, or foggy. Notice whether his energy meets your energy or simply reacts to the fear of losing you. Notice whether the standard has actually changed or whether he is merely distressed by the consequences of having lost access. You are not being cold if you observe. You are being wise. You are no longer auditioning for a role in his confusion. You are interviewing reality. And if he does not come back, if the silence remains silence, that does not diminish your value. It may, in fact, clarify it, because the absence of his return can save you years of orbiting around someone who was never going to give you what your heart was asking for. Not every unanswered story is tragic. Some are merciful, some close, not with fireworks, but with a quiet release from a pattern that would have kept stealing your dignity in small installments. You do not always get the explanation. Sometimes you get the exit, and the exit is enough. Here's what most people miss. Self-worth is not built in the moment someone finally chooses you. It is built in the moments you choose not to abandon yourself for someone else's convenience. It is built when you stop turning his hesitation into a referendum on your beauty, your lovability, your intelligence, your future. It is built when you say, his limitations are not my biography. His inability to meet me is not evidence that I am too much. His emotional immaturity does not become my sentence. Those ideas may feel intellectual at first. Keep practicing them. In time, they become embodied. In time, they become the way you walk into a room, the way you answer a text, the way you leave at the first sustained sign that someone wants the benefits of your presence without the courage of real choice. And here's something most people don't see coming. One day, the thing that used to feel like rejection begins to look more like information. Not because the pain was fake, because clarity has done its work. You start to see that being told he was not ready was not an invitation to wait in suspended animation. Being told he needed space was not a sacred instruction for you to hold yourself in the wings while he sorted himself out. Being told he cared but could not give more was not a riddle to decode. It was a limitation, painful, human, sometimes sincere, but still a limitation. And once you can call it that, you stop negotiating with it as if enough empathy on your part could convert it into a relationship. I want to pause on that for a second. because there is a very tender part of you that still wants to believe your love should have mattered enough to change the outcome. Of course, that part exists. It is the part that invested, the part that imagined, the part that saw superfluity. Be gentle with that part, but do not let that part run your life. Love matters. It always matters. But love on its own is not the same as compatibility, readiness, accountability, or emotional skill. And once you know that, you can stop using the existence of your feelings as evidence that this was meant to continue at any cost. You are not behind because this hurt you. You are not foolish because you stayed longer than you wish you had. Many intelligent women get trapped in this dynamic because they are capable of depth, nuance, patience, and care. Those qualities are beautiful. They only become dangerous when they are offered without a boundary. The answer is not to become less loving. It is to become more discerning, to let warmth live beside the standard, to let empathy live beside self-respect, to let your softness stop being permission for someone else's indecision. And here's the quiet verdict. The anxious woman's leaving is not the end of her power, it is the beginning of her clarity. The avoidance discomfort is not the measure of her worth. It is simply what happens when her absence removes the buffer between him and his own choices. Maybe he learns, maybe he doesn't. That part is his. Your part is dignity. Your part is self-respect. Your part is no longer confusing longing with instruction. If he felt safe only when you asked for less, that was never safety for you. If he liked your warmth but resisted your standard, he did not want all of you. If your silence now feels heavier to him than your words ever did, it is because the truth has finally lost its cushioning. And the truth is simple. Your silence after his distance is not weakness. It is the boundary that finally tells the truth. Stay with that. Let it become real.